What if you were handed a secret list of movies so shocking, so transgressive, they were banned, censored, and whispered about for decades? Would you press play or look away? Welcome to the wild heart of 1970s exploitation cinema, where no taboo was off limits and every screening was an act of rebellion. Tonight, we'll drag you through 20 films that scandalized, terrified, and electrified audiences. Steel your nerves. Are you ready to experience the films that society tried and failed to bury? Number 1. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If cinema has a midnight heart, it beats in the outrageous, filth-caked reels of John Waters' Pink Flamingos. From its first frames, the film declares war on good taste, introducing Divine, a drag queen anti-hero who makes every taboo her personal playground. The story is a trash opera. Divine's family squares off against the equally deranged Marbles, who sell babies and kidnap women, all in a grotesque competition for the title of filthiest person alive. Waters films bestiality, incest, and public indecency with the same deadpan glee, daring the audience not just to watch, but to cheer. Shot guerrilla style in Baltimore for next to nothing, Pink Flamingos sparked midnight movie culture, screenings where audience members howled, gagged, and applauded in equal measure. Waters became infamous for mailing soap to British censors who demanded cuts. Divine's infamous dog poop scene became a kind of cinematic litmus test. Are you in or are you out? What was once prosecuted as obscenity is now revered as ground zero for queer cinema and outsider art. The film endures because it's fearless, weirdly joyous, and fundamentally honest about its own depravity. Pink Flamingos is not for everyone, maybe not for most people, but those who love it with a fever no amount of soap could ever clean. Number 2. Super Vixens, 1975. If cartoonish sex, bad taste, and over-the-top violence are your thing, Russ Meyer's Super Vixens is the holy grail. It's a technicolor fever dream where every woman is a hypersexual Amazon, every man a pervert or a fool, and every scene an excuse for outrageous sight gags or bare skin. The plot, what there is of it, follows ranch hand Clint, who is framed for murder by a corrupt, sex-crazed cop, and finds himself on the run, betting a parade of super vixens with outlandish names like Super Soul and Super Cherry. Meyer, always the iconoclast, makes the violence as over-the-top as the nudity. Super Angel's murder, played for dark laughs, is as cartoonish as a Looney Tunes short, with geysers of blood and impossible slapstick. Critics were divided between horror and admiration. Was it pornography, satire, or some weird new hybrid? The film was banned or heavily cut in multiple territories, but its reputation only grew. Fans marveled at Meyer's rapid editing, his wild use of color and sound, and his uncanny ability to make the outrageous seem almost normal. Super Vixens is both a parody of exploitation and its purest distillation, loud, fast, lewd, and impossible to forget. A pop art ode to sex, violence, and total cinematic anarchy. Number 3. Sugar Cookies, 1973. Lloyd Kaufman, yes, the trauma guy, and a young Oliver Stone teamed up for Sugar Cookies, a strange, seductive blend of softcore eroticism and Hitchcockian noir. The plot reads like an erotic fever dream. Mary Woronov plays a manipulative model who seduces and films her lover's murder, then sets out to find a lookalike to play the victim in a twisted snuff fantasy. The line between reality and fantasy blurs, and the film becomes a dizzy, glittering descent into voyeurism and sexual power games. What sets Sugar Cookies apart is its style. Instead of grimy handheld shots and sweaty desperation, the film luxuriates in moody, artful lighting and chic, early 70s set design. The jazzy lounge soundtrack purrs beneath scenes of bubble baths and candlelit seductions, making everything feel dangerous but strangely beautiful. There's an art house soul beneath the exploitation shell, a sense that Kaufman and Stone are having a sly conversation with the audience about the very nature of watching and being watched. Mainstream distributors were wary, but the drive-in crowd devoured it, especially once the film's more explicit moments hit the rumor mill. Decades later, Sugar Cookies is remembered less for its nudity and more for its stylish, twisted meditation on desire, control, and the blurry boundaries of cinema itself. Number 4. Faces of Death, 1978. Long before YouTube reaction videos or shock horror clickbait, Faces of Death dared audiences to look at what society usually hides. Directed by John Allen Schwartz, this legendary Mondo film stitches together a wild patchwork of autopsy rooms, animal slaughterhouses, and grotesque stunts, blending actual documentary footage with theatrical reenactments that dared you to figure out what was real. The most infamous sequence, a so-called monkey brain banquet, was faked in a restaurant's back room, but viewers at the time didn't know or care. Marketed with lurid claims of being banned in over 40 countries, Faces of Death became an underground legend. Teens rented battered VHS copies from video stores and dared each other to watch the infamous opening autopsy, the electrocutions, the gory animal sequences. Moral guardians were scandalized. Parents lobbied for outright bans. Naturally, every kid had to see it. Its mystique only grew with every urban legend. Was that scene real? Did anyone faint? For many, the fear was less about what was on screen and more about what the film represented. A world with no filter, no comfort, and no taboos. Today, Faces of Death feels more like a time capsule than a true horror film, but its impact lingers, a primal dare that still chills the curious and the unwary. Number 5. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. If there's a single film that encapsulates the taboo-smashing audacity of 1970s exploitation, it's Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Set in a Nazi medical camp, Diane Thorne stars as Ilsa, a sadistic commandant obsessed with proving women can endure more pain than men. What follows is a barrage of torture, sexual humiliation, and gory experiments, all staged with a lurid glee that manages to be both mesmerizing and deeply uncomfortable. Shot on repurposed Hogan's Heroes sets in Canada, the film's sleaze factor is cranked to 11. Boiling water, tests, forced surgeries, sexual games with prisoners, and an unending parade of graphic punishments. Yet, behind the shock, Ilsa herself became an icon of exploitation, a dominatrix in jackboots and tight uniforms, wielding her sexuality as both weapon and armor. For censors, the movie was an instant red flag. Germany banned it outright, while most countries cut or buried the nastiest scenes. But its reputation only grew, spawning 3 equally outrageous sequels and countless rip-offs. Some see it as pure, indefensible trash, others as a strange, cathartic commentary on power and gender. One thing's certain, no one who endures its 2-hour onslaught forgets Ilsa's steely stare or the movie's operatic excess. Love it or loathe it, this film remains one of grindhouse cinema's most infamous jaw-dropping spectacles, proof that the 70s held nothing sacred. Number 6. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. Step right up to the most notorious theater in the grindhouse circuit, where sadism and sleaze take center stage in Blood-Sucking Freaks. The plot, if you can call it that, follows Sardu, a demented showman who runs a Grand Guignol theater of torture in New York's seedy underbelly, assisted by his grotesque dwarf henchman, Ralphus. What starts as staged horror quickly spirals into real-life mutilation and mind-bending depravity. Women are hypnotized, mutilated, and turned into brainless sex zombies for the pleasure of a paying audience that applauds every atrocity. Director Joel M. Reed pushes the envelope with wild abandon, serving up buckets of blood, severed limbs, and a bottomless pit of misogyny, so much that the film was banned or heavily censored in multiple countries. Critics panned it as tasteless trash, but it found a cult audience who reveled in its excesses, especially once Lloyd Kaufman and Trauma rescued it from obscurity. Its reputation as a punk rock rite of passage grew, screened at wild parties, quoted by shock musicians, even referenced in horror conventions as the ultimate I dare you viewing experience. The film walks a razor's edge between satire and exploitation, skewering both the audience's appetite for violence and the art world's pretensions. To this day, it remains one of the most infamous artifacts of 1970s splatter cinema, shocking, revolting, and impossible to ignore. Number 7. Caged Heat, 1974. Before Jonathan Demme became an Oscar-winning director, he cut his teeth on the wild, whip-cracking world of women in prison films, and Caged Heat is his feverish debut. Forget the polite restraint of later Demi classics. This is pure grindhouse pulp, dripping with sweat, sarcasm, and just enough surrealism to make you wonder what you're actually watching. The plot kicks off when a young woman, played by the magnetic Joanne Harris, is thrown into a brutal women's correctional facility, ruled by Barbara Steele's sadistic wheelchair-bound warden. Showers are communal, the guards are predatory, and escape plans are hatched between strip searches and group therapy sessions that turn into brawls. But Demi injects something different, an undercurrent of sly, proto-feminist satire that skewers the system, even as it revels in exploitation tropes. Dream sequences slide into the narrative, fantasies of freedom and vengeance with women dreaming of agency and justice. There are catfights, riot scenes, and jailbreak attempts, but they're filmed with a wink, poking fun at the genre's excesses while still delivering the goods. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Was it parody, homage, or just plain trash? Audiences, however, packed the midnight screenings, relishing the rebellious spirit and sly subversion. Today, Caged Heat stands as a high-water mark of the women in prison genre, a film as unpredictable and unruly as the inmates themselves. Number 8. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1773. Sweden isn't the first country that springs to mind for grindhouse excess, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture is a rare, brutal gem from the icy north. Christina Lindberg stars as Frigga, a young woman rendered mute after a childhood trauma, who is kidnapped, addicted to heroin, and forced into prostitution by a ruthless pimp. What follows is a transformation from victim to avenger. Frigga spends a year secretly training in martial arts, marksmanship, and stunt driving, plotting her bloody payback. Director Bo Arne Vibenius mixes explicit violence, slow-motion action, and even hardcore inserts in some versions, making Thriller notorious among collectors and censors alike. Swedish authorities demanded massive cuts. The full uncut version became a grail for exploitation fans worldwide. The film's eye-popping imagery, Lindbergh's eye patch, her cold stare, her relentless pursuit, directly inspired Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill and cemented its status as a cult classic. Thriller's narrative is simple, but its execution is pure pulp poetry, blending grindhouse sleaze with art house style. For viewers able to stomach its excesses, it's a singular experience, an icy, uncompromising revenge odyssey with a heroine who turns every tool of her abusers into a weapon of liberation. Number 9. I Spit on Your Grave, 1778. Few films provoke as intense a reaction as I Spit on Your Grave. From its infamous opening, where Jennifer Hills, a young writer, endures a brutal, extended assault by a group of small-town men, to its blood-soaked payback, the movie never lets up. For some, it's an endurance test. For others, a fiercely angry statement on vengeance and survival. The film spends nearly half its runtime in the aftermath of violence, as Jennifer slowly, methodically hunts down each of her attackers, turning everyday objects, a bath, a boat, a hatchet, into instruments of retribution. Director Mir Zarki claimed he wanted to confront audiences with the reality of sexual violence, stripping away the lurid gloss of Hollywood thrillers. Critics, most famously Roger Ebert, called it garbage, and many countries banned it outright or forced heavy edits. Yet, feminist critics have sometimes defended it, arguing that it gives Jennifer full agency and refuses to let viewers off the hook with easy answers or comforting moral lessons. Love it or hate it, the film remains infamous, a raw, uncompromising portrait of trauma and revenge that's impossible to forget. I Spit on Your Grave is not entertainment in the usual sense, but a cinematic gut punch that still divides, shocks, and, yes, demands to be reckoned with. Number 10. Hollywood Boulevard, 1976. Before Joe Dante and Alan Arkush made their names in mainstream Hollywood, they unleashed a riotous love letter to the very bottom of the film industry with Hollywood Boulevard. Framed as a meta-comedy about the making of B-movies, the film follows bright-eyed Candy Rylson as she lands a job at the hilariously cheap Miracle Pictures. If it's a good picture, it's a miracle. From there, it's a whirlwind of washed-up stars, dime-store directors, and crew members who will risk life and limb for a day's work or a fleeting moment on camera. Dante and Arkush fill the movie with knowing winks, inside jokes, and outright parodies, while also raiding producer Roger Corman's vast archive of stock footage to pad out the action. The result is a chaotic mosaic of car chases, jungle shootouts, and Amazonian brawls, with every cliché lovingly lampooned. The movie pokes fun at exploitation's excesses. Gratuitous nudity is delivered with a nod and a grin, and the body count stacks up alongside the jokes. Yet, despite the satire, there's genuine affection for the weird, wild world of low-budget cinema. Hollywood Boulevard is a time capsule of 70s schlock and self-awareness, a film for movie lovers who appreciate both the ridiculous and the sublime, and aren't afraid to laugh at the spectacle of cinematic survival. Number 11. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left is a landmark in horror, not just for what it shows, but for how it makes you feel. Inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, Craven drags the tale into the American heartland, where innocence is ripped apart by random violence. Two teenage girls, seeking a little adventure, fall prey to a gang of escaped convicts. The scenes of abduction, humiliation, and murder are filmed with a documentary rawness that makes them almost unbearable. There's no stylized escape, no comforting distance, just the ugly, relentless grind of real terror. But the film doesn't end with victimhood. In a now famous reversal, the killers inadvertently seek refuge in the home of one of their victims. The parents' discovery leads to an eruption of vigilante violence, circular saws, shotguns, and bloody justice served cold. Audiences in the 70s were shocked not just by the brutality, but by how it reflected the era's anxieties about the Vietnam War, the breakdown of the American family, and the thin veneer of civilization. Marketing urged viewers to keep repeating, "It's only a movie," but the impact lingered long after the credits rolled. Last House on the Left remains one of the most powerful, divisive, and influential exploitation films ever made, a descent into hell with no safety rails. Number 12. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When it comes to films that burrow under your skin and refuse to leave, few rival Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, shot on sunburned 16mm film and populated by actors willing to suffer for their art. This film shattered boundaries by making its rural Texas landscape feel alive with menace and rot. Ironically, it's far less gory than its reputation suggests. Much of its horror is suggested through the relentless, nerve-shredding soundtrack and raw, documentary-style visuals. Leatherface, the lumbering, flesh-masked butcher, doesn't just chase victims. He explodes into scenes, slamming doors and waving his chainsaw in a demented dance that's become iconic. The infamous dinner scene is pure nightmare fuel, cackling, shrieking, claustrophobic. British censors refused to certify the film, while American drive-ins turned it into a word-of-mouth phenomenon. Tobe Hooper reportedly wanted a PG rating, but what he got was infamy, debate, and midnight movie immortality. 40 years on, the grime, the sweat, the dread, none of it has faded. The film is routinely dissected in film schools, but no analysis can quite explain the primal terror that grabs your stomach as Sally runs screaming into the dawn, Leatherface howling and spinning, both victim and monster, in a world gone totally mad. Number 13. The Beast in Heat, 1977. Few films test the boundaries of taste and endurance like The Beast in Heat. Birthed from the notorious Italian Nazi-exploitation cycle, this film throws every conceivable outrage onto the screen. The plot, such as it is, centers around a sadistic Nazi doctor, Ellen Krach, who has engineered a mutant beast, caged and perpetually aroused, to terrorize and assault female prisoners. The setting, a World War II POW camp, where every day brings new horrors, graphic torture, sexual assault, and random violence that barely feign any connection to real history. The film's exploitative extremes earned it both infamy and a spot on the UK's banned video nasty list. What sets The Beast in Heat apart isn't just the taboo content, but the unhinged, almost surreal way it careens from cheap war movie battle scenes, often spliced from unrelated footage, to grotesque horror. There's no real attempt at narrative coherence. Instead, the movie bombards viewers with one provocation after another, daring you to keep watching. For some, It's the cinematic equivalent of an endurance test. For others, a morbid curiosity and collector's holy grail. Decades on, it remains one of exploitation's most notorious relics, a movie people talk about in shocked whispers, its title alone enough to unsettle even seasoned horror fans. Number 14. SS Experiment Camp, 1976. Few films on the video nasty list earned their notoriety with such calculated provocation as SS Experiment Camp, an Italian Nazi-exploitation shocker set in a hellish World War II death camp. The movie doesn't just push the boundaries of taste, it incinerates them. The story, if you can bear to call it that, centers around a sadistic Nazi officer, Dr. Steiner, obsessed with medical experiments that involve sexual mutilation, forced sterilization, and attempts to create a new Superman. Victims are paraded, tortured, and humiliated in scenes designed to outrage both history and decency. The film's marketing doubled down on its scandalous imagery, including a poster featuring a crucified naked woman, which was banned or censored in many countries. The UK government seized and destroyed tapes, while Germany and Australia refused any official release. Some argued that the film's over-the-top brutality and sexual sadism make it little more than cheap exploitation, while others see a subversive, if accidental, commentary on authority and abuse. Whatever your view, SS Experiment Camp became a symbol of the video nasty era, a film spoken about in hushed, scandalized tones by both fans and foes. Today, it's as much a piece of exploitation folklore as a movie, its title evoking memories of an era when censors battled, collectors hunted, and the line between history and horror was trampled into the mud. Number 15. Fight for Your Life, 1977. If you want to understand why some grindhouse films caused real-world outrage, look no further than Fight for Your Life. This movie doesn't tiptoe around controversy, it headbutts it. The premise is simple and explosive. 3 violent convicts, led by a seething racist white supremacist, break into the home of a devout black family and unleash a night of humiliation, racial slurs, and psychological torment. For much of the film, the family is beaten down, their dignity and faith tested to the breaking point. But the real fireworks come in the last act, when Patriarch Reverend Turner turns the tables, meting out biblical retribution that is as brutal as it is cathartic. The film was banned outright in the United Kingdom and caused headaches for censors in the US, not just because of its violence, but its relentless barrage of racist language and themes. Is it a condemnation of hatred or exploitation of real pain? Even decades later, debate rages among critics and viewers. What can't be denied is its raw, confrontational power. There's a nervous energy to every scene. No one is safe, nothing is predictable, and when the final reckoning arrives, it's both a release and a gut punch. Fight for Your Life is not an easy film, but it's a landmark of grindhouse extremity, a movie that dares you to look and then makes you pay for watching. Number 16. The Big Bird Cage, 1972. Take the wildest elements of the women in prison genre, catfights, sadistic guards, doomed escape attempts, and set them in a steamy, lawless jungle, and you get The Big Bird Cage. Director Jack Hill, already a veteran of exploitation cinema, brings together Pam Grier and Sid Haig for a riotous tale of revolution, camaraderie, and jungle justice. The titular Bird Cage is a grim sugar mill where women are imprisoned, overworked, and brutalized by a cast of over-the-top villains. Pam Grier's Blossom is a force of nature, sexy, tough, and fiercely independent, who fakes her own arrest to infiltrate the prison and spark a full-scale uprising. Sid Haig, her anarchist partner, adds comic mayhem and political subtext to the mix. The movie is filled with wild brawls, quicksand struggles, and jailbreak madness, all set to a funky score that keeps the energy high. Unlike some mean-spirited entries in the genre, The Big Bird Cage infuses its chaos with a sense of solidarity and fun. When the women finally revolt, it's a cathartic, fist-pumping moment of triumph. Hill's camera revels in both exploitation excess and genuine empowerment, making the film a beloved cult classic and a standout in the crowded jungle of grindhouse cinema. Number 17. The Arena, 1974. Imagine the ultimate drive-in fever dream. Pam Grier, having already conquered blaxploitation as Coffee and Friday Foster, is kidnapped, stripped of her agency, and dumped in the dust of ancient Rome. In the arena, she and Margaret Markov are sold into gladiator servitude and forced to brawl for a leering toga-clad crowd. The formula is pure 1970s exploitation alchemy. Take the ferocity of a women in prison flick, swap the barred windows for the marble columns of Cinecittà's leftover Ben-Hur sets, and let the catfight spiral into all-out rebellion. Greer, always magnetic, wields her trident with Amazonian rage, her sweat and determination outshining even the studio's recycled armor. Critics at the time sneered at its tacky feminism, with its topless combat and slow-motion breastplates, but audiences loved it, a guilty pleasure history lesson, as lurid and excessive as a tabloid headline. The soundtrack by Francesco De Masi pulses under the action, giving the whole saga an unmistakable groove that places it squarely in the grindhouse pantheon. There's a certain punk energy here, as our heroines inspire a slave uprising, turn the tables on their captors, and unleash the very lions meant for their doom. The arena remains a pulpier, bloodier cousin to Spartacus, best enjoyed with popcorn, a flask of something cheap, and an appreciation for cinematic sweat and subversion. Number 18. Lady Snowblood, 1973. In the icy snowscapes of Meiji-era Japan, vengeance blooms like a crimson flower in Lady Snowblood. The film's heroine, Yuki, born in prison, trained since childhood in swordplay and revenge, is an unstoppable force on a singular mission: avenge her mother's rape and the murder of her family. Every duel she fights is a ballet of stylized violence, with geysers of bright red blood spraying across pristine white snow. The film's structure is as elegant as its violence is shocking, told in flashbacks, split screens, and poetic voiceover. Lady Snowblood is as much art house as grindhouse. Director Toshia Fujita crafts a world where beauty and brutality intertwine. Meiko Kaji, with her icy stare and haunting theme song, became an icon, inspiring countless imitations. Quentin Tarantino paid direct homage in Kill Bill, borrowing not just visuals, but the very mood and spirit of the film. Japanese censors rated it for adults only, but audiences flocked to see Yuki's journey, making the film a box office hit and spawning a sequel. Lady Snowblood endures as one of cinema's most memorable revenge tales, lyrical, violent, and unforgettable. A story where justice is as cold and implacable as the winter wind, and vengeance is written in blood on snow. Number 19. Foxy Brown, 1974. No one embodied 1970s exploitation cool quite like Pam Grier, and Foxy Brown stands as her fiercest, most uncompromising showcase. Grier's Foxy is a one-woman wrecking crew, posing as a high-class call girl to infiltrate a vicious heroin syndicate, torching the villain's limo, and dispatching henchmen with everything from shotguns to razor blades hidden in her afro. Every scene pulses with danger, wit, and outrage. Director Jack Hill doesn't just use blaxploitation tropes, he supercharges them. Saturated colors, funk-heavy soundtrack, snappy dialogue, and a social conscience sharpened to a blade. The film's violence is cathartic, not gratuitous. Foxy's anger feels righteous, and Grier channels the real frustrations of the era's racial and gender politics. British censors panicked. American TV versions were hacked to bits, but nothing could stop Foxy's swagger. The film's legendary climax, Foxy strutting past dumbfounded cops, the villain's manhood pickled in a jar, became an instant classic, a moment of feminist triumph wrapped in grindhouse bravado. Grier's performance is the stuff of legend, and the film's fearless mix of social satire, over-the-top action, and genuine pathos makes it not just a blaxploitation essential, but a towering figure in the whole exploitation genre. Foxy Brown didn't just kick open doors, she burned down the whole house and danced through the ashes. Blackula, 1972. Some titles are so outrageous they become cultural shorthand. Blackula was meant to be just a quick cash-in on the blaxploitation boom, an African prince turned vampire in 1970s Los Angeles. But what emerged was a cult horror classic that mixed supernatural chills with real social commentary. William Marshall plays Prince Mamuwalde, who's cursed by Dracula himself, and awakens centuries later to stalk the city in search of blood, love, and justice. Marshall's performance is regal, tragic, and deeply human. No mere monster, but a victim of colonialism and prejudice, lashing out at a world that never accepted him. The film's funky score and gritty LA setting give Blackula an energy all its own. It's part police procedural, part tragic love story, and part old-fashioned monster movie, but it never feels like a simple parody. The scenes of Mamuwalde confronting bigotry and violence resonate beyond the vampire trappings, giving the film unexpected weight. Critics sneered at the title, but audiences flocked to theaters, making Blackula a box office hit and paving the way for a sequel and countless imitators. Today it's recognized as an essential piece of black horror cinema, proof that even the most outrageous premises can deliver thrills, pathos, and a fresh bite of cultural subversion. Which one are you brave enough to watch first? Which story will you dare to tell your friends about at midnight, when the lights are low and you can almost hear the flicker of a battered projector in the background? If you loved this deep dive into cinema's wildest corners, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more film history, hidden gems, and stories the mainstream is too scared to tell. Got a favorite Grindhouse classic or a personal midnight movie memory? Drop it in the comments. We want to hear all your wildest recommendations and wildest tales. Until next time, keep your mind open, your popcorn hot, and always remember, in the world of exploitation, there are no rules, only legends. The whistles that changed Western cinema forever. When was the last time you heard a film score that made you stop in your tracks? For fans of Western cinema, Ennio Morricone's name conjures immediate images of Clint Eastwood's squinting eyes and dramatic Mexican standoffs. But beyond the good, the bad, and the ugly lies a treasure trove of lesser-known Western masterpieces where Morricone's genius runs wild. These forgotten scores didn't just accompany films, they revolutionized cinema sound forever, influencing everyone from Tarantino to modern hip-hop producers. Ready to discover the sonic frontier you never knew existed? The Big Gun Down, 1966. The soundtrack that launched 1,000 imitators, but remains criminally underappreciated. Lee Van Cleef stars in this Sergio Solima-directed gem that features one of Morricone's most innovative and groundbreaking scores. While most film composers of the era relied on traditional orchestration, Morricone threw convention out the window, introducing a radical mix of trumpet fanfares, avant-garde instrumentals, and chorus vocals that created an entirely new sonic language for the Western genre. The film's main theme starts with those unforgettable trumpet blasts that seem to announce something monumental is about to happen. The genius lies in how Morricone intertwines this with whispering vocals and unexpected instrumentation that perfectly mirrors the cat-and-mouse chase between Van Cleef's bounty hunter and Thomas Million's cunning fugitive. What makes this score revolutionary is how Morricone used his music to transform standard Western scenarios into operatic drama. The compositions didn't just complement the action, they elevated it to mythic proportions. Tarantino was so moved by this score that he later borrowed elements for *Inglourious Bastards*, introducing a new generation to its power. Despite the film's cult status among Western aficionados, most casual fans have never experienced this masterpiece that demonstrates Morricone's ability to make instruments speak in ways no one had imagined before. Face to Face, 1967. When a genius composer met a tale of moral degradation, cinema history was quietly made. This Sergio Solima Western stars Gian Maria Volonté as a professor who falls in with Thomas Million's outlaw, embarking on a descent into moral corruption that few films of the era dared to portray. What makes Morricone's score exceptional is how it charts this psychological journey through sound. The score begins with dignified, almost aristocratic themes representing the professor's academic world, then gradually introduces discordant elements as his character transforms. Morricone created a musical narrative that parallels the film's exploration of how civilization and savagery are often two sides of the same coin. Most impressive is the haunting finale piece, where choral arrangements and strings create an atmosphere of tragic inevitability. This wasn't just background music, it was psychological storytelling through sound. The film's examination of how easily morality can crumble when tested made it controversial upon release, causing many distributors to pass on it despite its artistic merits. Film scholars now recognize this score as one of Morricone's most sophisticated compositions, demonstrating his understanding that the most compelling westerns were never just about gunfights, but about the human condition itself. Death Rides a Horse, 1967. The revenge score that inspired Kill Bill decades before Tarantino was a household name. Giulio Petroni's revenge tale, starring Lee Van Cleef and John Philip Law, features one of Morricone's most intense and psychologically probing scores. The film follows a young man seeking vengeance against the bandits who massacred his family, with Van Cleef as his unlikely mentor. Morricone's genius emerges in how he uses dissonant choral arrangements and sharp staccato instrumentation to represent trauma and memory. The main theme features an unsettling choir that seems to cry out in anguish, punctuated by aggressive guitar strums that sound like slashes of a knife. The composer created recurring musical motifs that trigger whenever the protagonist experiences flashbacks to his trauma, an innovative technique that makes the audience feel the character's psychological state. This psychological dimension elevated what could have been a standard revenge tale into something far more profound. Tarantino was so moved by this score that he prominently featured it in Kill Bill Volume 1" during key scenes. Yet, despite this modern recognition, many Western fans have never experienced the original film where this revolutionary music first appeared, missing out on one of cinema's most perfect marriages of visual storytelling and musical composition. Navajo Joe, 1966. The score that brought indigenous musical elements into the Western soundscape in revolutionary ways. Sergio Corbucci's film, starring Burt Reynolds as a Native American seeking revenge against scalp hunters, features one of Morricone's most culturally adventurous scores. Working under the pseudonym Leo Nichols, Morricone created a soundtrack that incorporated stylized Native American vocal elements and percussion in ways never before heard in Western cinema. The main theme, with its dramatic vocal chants and driving rhythmic elements, creates an immediate sense of otherness that perfectly positions Reynolds' character as an outsider seeking justice in a hostile world. Instead of relying on stereotypical Indian music, Morricone created something both respectful and dramatically powerful. What's remarkable is how Morricone used these ethnic elements not as exotic decoration, but as integral emotional components of the storytelling. The percussion and vocal arrangements intensify during action sequences, creating a visceral, almost tribal energy that puts viewers directly into the protagonist's experience. Despite Reynolds later dismissing the film as one of his worst, music critics and film composers still study this score for its innovative fusion of cultural elements and dramatic tension. It remains one of the most distinctive Western soundtracks ever created, yet is rarely discussed alongside Morricone's more famous works. The Return of Ringo, 1965. The Western reimagining of the Odyssey that gave us one of Morricone's most emotionally rich scores. Duccio Tesseri's film starring Giuliano Gemma tells the story of a Civil War veteran who returns home to find his wife betrothed to another man and his town under the control of Mexican bandits. This loose adaptation of Homer's Odyssey provided Morricone with the perfect canvas for one of his most emotionally nuanced scores. What makes this soundtrack special is its melancholic beauty and thematic richness. The main theme, performed with vocals by Maurizio Graf, establishes a tone of nostalgic longing that perfectly captures the protagonist's yearning for a home that no longer exists. As the film progresses, Morricone transforms this theme, making it darker and more determined as the hero reclaims his identity. Unlike many Western scores that focus primarily on tension and action, this one delves deeply into loss, identity, and redemption. Morricone uses subtle musical shifts to signal the protagonist's emotional journey from defeated soldier to determined avenger. Film historians now recognize this as one of the most sophisticated early spaghetti Western scores, demonstrating Morricone's range beyond the iconic but more stylized compositions he created for Leone's films. Yet mainstream audiences rarely mention it when discussing the composer's greatest works. A Bullet for the General, 1966. When political ideology met Morricone's genius, a revolutionary soundtrack was born. Damiano Damiani's politically charged Zapata Western stars John Maria Volonté as a Mexican revolutionary, and Lou Castel as a mysterious American with his own agenda. This film, with its examination of revolution and imperialism, inspired Morricone to create one of his most politically charged scores. The genius of this soundtrack lies in how Morricone blends traditional Mexican musical elements with his signature experimental techniques. The main theme combines mariachi-inspired trumpets with unusual percussion and choral elements, creating a sound that's both culturally specific and dramatically universal. Most impressive is how Morricone uses musical contrasts to highlight the film's ideological conflicts. The revolutionary characters get sweeping, passionate themes, while the American character is accompanied by colder, more mechanical musical motifs, subtly underscoring the film's political message through sound. Despite being one of the most thoughtful and politically complex westerns of its era, the film remains largely overlooked by casual fans, and with it, one of Morricone's most intellectually engaging scores. Modern political filmmakers still study this soundtrack for its ability to communicate ideology through music without resorting to heavy-handedness. Te Pepa, 1969. The forgotten masterpiece where Morricone scored the clash between idealism and brutal reality. This Giulio Petroni film stars Tomas Milian as a Mexican revolutionary and Orson Welles as a ruthless colonel, with John Steiner as an English doctor seeking revenge. This complex tale of revolution, betrayal, and vengeance inspired one of Morricone's most politically nuanced scores. What makes this soundtrack remarkable is how it captures the disillusionment that follows revolutionary fervor. The main theme begins with proud, almost triumphant elements that gradually give way to more melancholic and ambiguous tones, mirroring the film's exploration of how revolutionary ideals often crumble in practice. Morricone brilliantly uses contrasting musical motifs for each main character. Folk-inspired themes for Milian's revolutionary, cold and precise arrangements for Welles's colonel, and haunting, obsessive melodies for the vengeful doctor. This musical characterization adds psychological depth to an already complex narrative. Despite featuring Orson Welles and tackling themes that remain politically relevant today, the film has been largely forgotten by mainstream audiences, taking with it one of Morricone's most sophisticated examinations of the human cost of political violence and ideological conflict. Compañeros, 1970, the buddy western that gave us one of Morricone's most exuberant and joyful scores. Sergio Corbucci's film stars Franco Nero and Tomas Milian as unlikely allies during the Mexican Revolution, with Jack Palance as their nemesis. This combination of revolutionary politics, buddy dynamics, and Corbucci's trademark brutality inspired Morricone to create one of his most energetic and varied scores. The main theme captures the film's essence perfectly, starting with a militant drum pattern before exploding into a jubilant, almost celebratory arrangement that communicates both revolutionary fervor and the unexpected friendship at the story's heart. Throughout the film, Morricone alternates between rousing action pieces and more contemplative compositions that underscore the characters' evolving relationship. What's particularly impressive is how Morricone balances the film's contrasting tones, from broad comedy to shocking violence, with a score that somehow unifies these elements into a coherent whole. The music brings emotional truth to even the most outlandish scenarios. Despite being one of Corbucci's most successful films internationally, it remains overshadowed by Django in popular culture, meaning many fans have never experienced this uniquely vibrant entry in Morricone's Western catalog that showcases his ability to infuse revolutionary politics with genuine heart. Guns for San Sebastian, 1968. When sacred and secular collided in Morricone's most spiritually complex Western score. Henri Verneuil's film stars Anthony Quinn as an outlaw mistaken for a priest and Charles Bronson as a mysterious adversary. This unusual premise, an atheist forced to become a spiritual leader, inspired Morricone to create one of his most thematically rich and emotionally complex scores. What makes this soundtrack extraordinary is how it blends religious musical elements with traditional Western motifs. The score features church-like choral arrangements and organ-inspired melodies that gradually transform as Quinn's character evolves from reluctant imposter to genuine spiritual leader. This musical journey parallels the film's exploration of faith found in unexpected circumstances. Morricone creates a fascinating musical dialogue between the sacred and profane worlds of the story. The contrast between solemn, almost liturgical compositions and more traditional action-oriented pieces creates a sonic representation of the protagonist's internal conflict between his outlaw past and newfound purpose. Despite featuring two major Hollywood stars and a score that ranks among Morricone's most emotionally sophisticated works, the film has been largely forgotten in discussions of great westerns, denying many fans the experience of this uniquely spiritual entry in the composer's catalog. What Am I Doing in the Middle of the Revolution? 1972. The Western comedy that proved Morricone's genius extended far beyond tension and drama. This Sergio Corbucci comedy stars Vittorio Gassman as a theater actor who accidentally becomes involved in revolutionary activities in Mexico. This lighthearted premise inspired Morricone to showcase a rarely seen side of his compositional talent, his gift for comedy and satire. The genius of this score lies in how Morricone playfully subverts the musical conventions he helped establish in more serious westerns. The main theme has an almost circus-like quality, with exaggerated flourishes and theatrical elements that perfectly capture the film's farcical tone while still maintaining recognizable Western motifs. Most impressive is how Morricone uses musical quotation and pastiche throughout the score, referencing both classical music and his own earlier Western themes in comically exaggerated ways. This self-awareness adds another layer of sophistication to what might otherwise be dismissed as a mere genre parody. Despite featuring one of Italy's most celebrated actors and representing a rare comedic collaboration between Morricone and Corbucci, the film remains largely unknown outside of dedicated spaghetti western circles, robbing casual fans of the opportunity to experience the composer's remarkable versatility and wit. The whistle of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly might have made Morricone a household name, but these 10 overlooked masterpieces reveal the true depth of his genius. From revolutionizing how music could express political ideology to reimagining what Western film music could sound like, these scores weren't just background noise. They were sonic revolutions that forever changed cinema's soundscape. If you enjoyed this exploration of Morricone's lesser-known Western scores, please, which of these hidden Morricone masterpieces intrigued you most? Let us know in the comments below. What happens when you mix bodybuilders, ancient myths, and Italian filmmaking on a shoestring budget? You get peplum, the gloriously over-the-top sword and sandal epics that conquered screens worldwide before fading into obscurity. Today, we unearth 15 legendary muscle man adventures available in public domain prints. Forgotten treasures waiting to be rediscovered by modern eyes. Hercules, 1958. American bodybuilder Steve Reeves steps into the sandals of mythology's greatest hero, transforming overnight from Mr. Universe to international film star. Director Pietro Francici crafted this colorful adventure on a modest budget, never suspecting it would spawn hundreds of imitators and create an entire genre. The film's tremendous success in America shocked industry experts, proving audiences craved mythological spectacle. Reeves performs his own stunts throughout, including the famous sequence where Hercules pulls down massive temple pillars. His physique became the gold standard for all peplum heroes to follow. The production faced numerous challenges, including costumes that repeatedly tore when Reeves flexed his muscles. Cinematographer Mario Bava, who would later direct several peplum films himself, developed innovative lighting techniques to emphasize the star's impressive musculature. "I never intended to become an actor," Reeves later confessed. "I just wanted to travel to Europe." Little did he know this Italian adventure would define his career. The film's public domain status has unfortunately led to many low-quality prints circulating, with washed-out colors that don't do justice to the original's vibrant Mediterranean palette. Despite technical shortcomings in available versions, Hercules remains the quintessential starting point for any peplum exploration. Goliath and the Barbarians, 1959. Here's a curious fact. This film was originally titled Goliath Against the Giants in Italy, but featured neither Goliath nor giants. American distributors, capitalizing on audience confusion, renamed various characters across multiple films to boost ticket sales. Steve Reeves returns, technically playing a character named Emiliano, rebranded as Goliath for American audiences, seeking more Hercules-style adventures. Set during the Lombardian invasion of Italy in 568 AD, this film ventures beyond typical mythological territory into quasi-historical drama. Director Carlo Campogalliani stages ambitious battle sequences with hundreds of extras, creating a sense of scale rarely seen in peplum films. The infamous village massacre sequence proved so realistic that several extras suffered minor injuries during filming. The film's standout moment arrives when Reeves dons a distinctive horned helmet to disguise himself as the Avenger, creating an almost superhero-like dual identity. This marketing-friendly image became iconic on posters worldwide. Cello Alonso's captivating dance sequence caused controversy, with several countries demanding cuts before approval. The public domain print suffers from poor audio synchronization, but the visual grandeur still impresses despite these technical limitations. Hercules against the Moon Men, 1964. Just when you thought peplum couldn't get stranger, along comes a film blending Greek mythology with alien invaders. Sergio Ciani plays Hercules battling extraterrestrial villains who arrive from the moon in crystalline spaceships. Director Giacomo Gentilomo crafted this bizarre hybrid during the genre's declining years, when producers desperately sought fresh angles to attract dwindling audiences. The film's notorious sandstorm sequence stretches an excruciating 7 minutes, leading Mystery Science Theater 3000 to immortalize it with their cry of deep hurting. The Moon Men themselves, with their distinctive rock-like masks, reportedly terrified children on set. The costumes, designed by Giulio Coltellacci, utilized innovative materials, including molded plastic and early synthetic fabrics, to achieve their otherworldly appearance. What fascinates most is how the film anticipates later science fiction tropes, including ancient astronaut theories that would gain popularity years later. "We were making it up as we went along," assistant director Franco Cirino later admitted. Nobody questioned why aliens would want Hercules as an enemy. The available public domain print features a laughably poor English dub that unintentionally enhances the entertainment value, making this a perfect entry point for viewers who appreciate cinematic oddities. Colossus of Rhodes, 1961. Before revolutionizing westerns with A Fistful of Dollars, Sergio Leone directed this ambitious peplum starring American actor Rory Calhoun. The film's centerpiece, the 100-foot bronze statue straddling Rhodes Harbor, becomes not just a wonder of the ancient world, but a functioning death trap, complete with hidden rooms and deadly mechanisms. Leone's directorial trademarks already appear: extreme close-ups, tension-building musical cues, and meticulously choreographed action sequences. The spectacular earthquake finale, destroying the massive statue, pushed 1961's special effects capabilities to their limits. The production utilized miniatures, practical effects, and innovative camera techniques to create the illusion of the colossal structure. Leone drove us mercilessly, recalled cinematographer Antonio Ballesteros. He already had this vision of cinema as operatic spectacle. Behind the scenes, tensions flared between Leone and producers over budget constraints, foreshadowing his later Hollywood battles. The film's relatively complex political intrigue storyline distinguishes it from simpler peplum narratives, revealing Leone's ambitions beyond the genre's limitations. The available public domain print unfortunately crops the original widescreen composition, but Leone's visual ingenuity remains evident despite this compromise. Giants of Rome, 1964. Director Antonio Margheriti blends peplum conventions with war movie tropes in this tale of 4 Roman soldiers on a suicide mission behind enemy lines. Richard Harrison leads the specialized commando team, tasked with destroying a secret Gallic weapon. The film eschews mythological elements entirely, focusing instead on military strategy and camaraderie among soldiers. Essentially, the Dirty Dozen in togas. Margheriti, known for his technical prowess, crafts impressive siege weapon sequences using practical effects and miniatures. The catapult attacks and firebomb assaults create genuine spectacle despite budget limitations. Behind the scenes, unexpected torrential rains plagued the production, turning the outdoor sets into muddy quagmires that had to be continuously rebuilt. The film features unusually realistic combat choreography for the genre, with military advisor Captain Giovanni Braccio bringing authentic Roman battle tactics to the screen. "We studied ancient military texts," Harrison later explained. "These weren't just muscle men swinging swords randomly. The film's distinctly gritty tone represents peplum's evolution toward greater realism as the genre matured. The public domain print suffers from contrast issues in night scenes, but daytime sequences preserve the impressive production values that distinguish this ambitious production. Goliath and the Sins of Babylon, 1963. Mark Forrest flexes his impressive physique as Goliath in this lavish adventure featuring chariot races, gladiatorial combat, and an Olympic-style athletic competition. Director Michel Lupo prioritizes spectacular set pieces over narrative coherence, creating a theme park ride of peplum attractions that barely connect to form a cohesive story. The film's highlight remains its elaborate water battle sequence, where athletes compete atop floating platforms while attempting to knock opponents into the water. This sequence required constructing a massive water tank, specifically for the production, with multiple cameras capturing the action from above and below the water's surface. Several cast members suffered injuries during these demanding aquatic stunts. Behind the camera, tensions mounted between American Star Forest and Italian producers over working conditions. "They expected us to perform dangerous stunts without proper safety measures," Forrest later revealed. "I refused several times, causing production delays." Despite these challenges, the film delivers unparalleled visual spectacle for its modest budget. The public domain print's faded colors cannot diminish the impressive scale of the production design, which utilized every corner of Cinecittà Studios' famous backlot. War of the Trojans, 1962. Steve Reeves returns as Aeneas in this sequel to The Trojan Horse, chronicling the survivor's journey after Troy's destruction. Director Giorgio Ferroni adapts portions of Virgil's Aeneid with surprising fidelity to the source material, elevating this entry above typical genre fare. The film's ambitious scope follows Aeneas through multiple adventures before founding what would become Rome. Impressive naval battle sequences feature full-sized ship replicas constructed specifically for the production, with hundreds of extras engaged in maritime combat. The legendary sequence where Queen Dido builds her funeral pyre required extensive safety preparations, with firefighters standing by as actress Gianna Maria Canale performed dangerously close to controlled flames. Production designer Franco Lolli created distinctive visual identities for each civilization Aeneas encounters, researching ancient cultures to inform the film's varied costumes and architecture. "We wanted each kingdom to feel like a different world," Lolli explained in a rare interview. Composer Carlo Rusticelli's haunting score draws on ancient musical modes, creating a soundscape that enhances the film's mythic qualities. While the public domain print suffers from inconsistent audio levels, the visual grandeur of this ambitious production remains apparent despite technical limitations. Maciste, in King Solomon's Mines, 1964. Maciste, a uniquely Italian hero with no mythological equivalent, ventures to Africa in this bizarre genre hybrid. Bodybuilder Reg Park portrays the wandering strongman who discovers a lost civilization and battles tyrannical Queen Karima. Director Piero Regnoli freely borrows from H. Rider Haggard's famous novel while injecting distinctive peplum elements. The production filmed partially on location in Egypt, with second-unit footage of authentic African landscapes enhancing the exotic atmosphere. Park performed remarkably dangerous stunts, including wrestling a sedated but still unpredictable lion. "They simply told me the animal was mostly trained," Park recalled with amusement. "I didn't discover until later that it had injured 3 trainers previously." The film's problematic portrayal of African cultures reflects the era's limited cultural awareness, though it attempts greater authenticity than many contemporaries. Elaborate cave sets constructed at Cinecittà Studios featured actual gold dust mixed into paint to create convincingly glittering treasure chambers. The public domain print's poor contrast obscures many dark cave sequences, but daytime scenes preserve the film's colorful pageantry and impressive location photography that distinguished it from studio-bound competitors. Samson and the Seven Miracles of the World, 1961. In perhaps the genre's most ambitious geographical leap, director Ricardo Freda sends his muscle-bound hero to ancient China. Gordon Scott plays Matiste, renamed Samson for American audiences, who aids Chinese rebels against Mongol invaders. This East-meets-West curiosity represents peplum's desperate search for fresh settings during the genre's commercial decline. The production transforms Cinecittà backlots into convincing Chinese settings through elaborate set decoration and carefully chosen camera angles. Martial arts sequences integrate Eastern fighting styles with Western strongman conventions, creating unique hybrid action scenes years before the kung fu craze. Lead actress Yoko Tani provided cultural consultations to improve authenticity in costumes and set decoration. Behind the scenes, language barriers created constant challenges, with 5 different languages spoken among cast and crew. "We communicated mostly through gestures," Scott later explained. "It created this strange energy that actually works in the film." The famous sequence where Samson holds apart 2 closing walls was achieved through practical effects that malfunctioned repeatedly, nearly injuring Scott during filming. The public domain print suffers from poor color timing, but the production's inventive visual elements still impress despite technical limitations. Hercules and the Captive Women, 1961. Reg Park makes his debut as Hercules, journeying to the lost civilization of Atlantis in this visually ambitious adventure. Director Vittorio Cotafavi brings unusual artistic sensibilities to the genre, employing stylized color schemes and expressionistic lighting to create a dreamlike atmosphere unlike typical peplum productions. The film's Atlantean sequences feature striking modernist set designs that deliberately contrast with traditional ancient world settings. Costume designer Maurizio Chiari created memorable transparent masks for Atlantean soldiers, which proved so difficult to breathe through that numerous extras fainted during filming. The sequence where Hercules battles a mechanical bull required Park to fight against an early hydraulic creation that frequently malfunctioned, leading to genuine moments of unpredictability captured on film. Cotafavi approached this as art, not just entertainment, noted assistant director Franco Cirino. He referenced classical paintings for every composition. The film's subtext about racial purification and eugenics adds unexpected depth, though these elements were often cut from international versions. The public domain print suffers from numerous splices and missing footage, but enough remains to appreciate Cotafavi's distinctive visual approach that elevated this production above formulaic genre entries. Ursus in the Valley of the Lions, 1961. Ed Fury stars as Ursus, another mythological strongman created specifically for Italian cinema. Director Carlo Ludovico Bragaglia crafts a revenge narrative as Ursus searches for his kidnapped bride while battling lions, warriors, and corrupt rulers. The film showcases impressive animal sequences that push the boundaries of safety standards in 1960s Italian cinema. The production's most remarkable achievement involves Fury's interactions with actual lions, filmed using innovative split-screen techniques and carefully positioned barriers invisible to cameras. Despite these precautions, filming halted for 3 days after a lion unexpectedly broke through safety measures, causing no injuries but destroying expensive camera equipment. Fury performed his own stunts throughout, including the harrowing sequence where he's suspended over a pit of hungry lions. "Working with animals was terrifying but exhilarating," Fury later recalled. The Italian crew had a much more relaxed attitude towards safety than American productions. Behind the scenes, the film's original script underwent significant rewrites after censors objected to several violent sequences, including a gladiatorial combat scene considered too graphic for general audiences. The available public domain print suffers from inconsistent audio levels, but the impressive lion sequences remain powerful despite technical limitations in this overlooked peplum adventure. Triumph of the Son of Hercules, 1961. Known in Italy as Triumph of Matiste, this film features bodybuilder Kirk Morris as yet another muscle man navigating ancient world intrigue. American distributors, continuing their practice of renaming characters to capitalize on Hercules' popularity, transformed Makiste into Hercules' offspring for English-speaking audiences. Director Mario Costa delivers a visually distinctive entry with unusually elaborate underwater sequences. The film's standout achievement involves extensive underwater photography, with Morris performing demanding aquatic stunts while battling opponents beneath the surface. These sequences required constructing a specialized water tank with transparent viewing panels for cameras. Morris, who lacked professional diving experience, underwent intensive training before filming. "I nearly drowned twice during production," he later admitted. "The weight of my costume made swimming nearly impossible." Production designer Mario Giorgi created elaborate subterranean sets featuring artificial stalactites and water features that required continuous maintenance between takes. The memorable sequence where the hero battles water creatures utilized innovative latex prosthetics that deteriorated rapidly in water, necessitating multiple replacements during filming. The public domain print's murky contrast particularly affects underwater scenes, but enough visual information remains to appreciate this aquatic adventure that pushed peplum into new environments rarely seen in the genre. Vulcan, Son of Jupiter, 1962. Rod Flash portrays Vulcan, the god of fire and forge, in this unusual entry focusing on a rarely featured mythological figure. Director Ennio Morricone crafts a narrative centered around Vulcan's legendary craftsmanship, rather than merely showcasing physical strength, distinguishing this film from typical strongman fare. The volcanic forge sequences feature impressive practical effects, creating genuinely hazardous filming conditions. The production constructed a functioning forge on set, with real molten metal used in carefully controlled sequences supervised by metallurgical experts. This commitment to authenticity created unprecedented challenges, including studio temperatures exceeding 100 degrees during forge scenes. The elaborate golden armor created for the film's climax involved genuine gold leaf application techniques, resulting in a costume so valuable it remained under armed guard when not being filmed. "We wanted to show Vulcan as more than muscles. He's the divine craftsman," explained scriptwriter Gianfranco Parolini. "His strength comes from skill, not just physical power." This more cerebral approach to the peplum hero represents an interesting evolution for the genre. The remarkable sequence where Vulcan creates magical weapons features time-lapse photography of actual metalworking processes, blended seamlessly with mythological elements. The public domain print suffers from color fading that diminishes the fiery visuals, but the film's unique approach to peplum conventions remains evident despite these technical limitations. A Mole Men Against the Son of Hercules, 1961. Mark Forrest returns to peplum in this bizarre adventure, originally titled Makiste, the Strongest Man in the World, before American distributors rebranded it. Director Antonio Leon Viola takes the genre underground as our hero discovers a subterranean civilization of pale, blind humanoids who capture surface dwellers as slaves. This curious production blends peplum conventions with science fiction elements, creating a hybrid that stretches the genre's flexible boundaries even further. The film's underground kingdom required constructing massive cavern sets that occupied 3 separate sound stages at Cinecittà Studios. The production design team developed a unique phosphorescent paint formula for the cavern walls that created an eerie glow under specialized lighting conditions. The mole men themselves, with their distinctive pale makeup and milky contact lenses, required 4 hours of daily preparation for each extra. Several performers suffered temporary vision problems from the primitive contact lenses. "The makeup was torture," revealed supporting actor Paul Winter. "Many extras quit after 1 day of filming." The film's most spectacular sequence involves a cave collapse achieved through controlled demolition of actual set pieces rather than miniatures, creating genuine danger for performers. Forrest performed his own stunts throughout, including a precarious scene traversing a narrow underground bridge suspended over actual flames. The public domain print suffers from numerous splices and missing footage, but enough remains to appreciate this uniquely atmospheric entry that pushed the genre into unexpected territory. Perseus the Invincible, 1963. Richard Harrison portrays the legendary Perseus, famous for slaying the Gorgon Medusa, in this mythology-heavy peplum that surprisingly attempts to follow actual Greek myths more closely than most entries in the genre. Director Alberto De Martino brings visual flair to familiar stories, with impressive creature effects creating memorable, monstrous opponents for our hero. The film's Medusa sequence in particular represents a high point for practical effects in Italian cinema of this era. The production team spent nearly a third of the film's budget on creature effects, including a mechanical Medusa with separately articulated snakes operated by off-camera puppeteers. The monster sequences required innovative techniques to create the illusion of petrifaction when victims gazed upon Medusa. We developed a special makeup that could be applied and set within seconds between camera cuts, explained effects supervisor Carlo Rambaldi, who would later win Oscars for his work on major Hollywood productions. Harrison prepared extensively for the physically demanding role, training with the Italian Olympic fencing team to make the elaborate sword-fighting sequences more convincing. "We choreographed each battle like a dance," Harrison noted. "It was exhausting, but created more authentic combat than most peplum films." The sequence where Perseus navigates the underground labyrinth was filmed in actual ancient Roman cisterns beneath Cinecittà Studios, adding authentic ancient atmosphere to these scenes. The public domain print suffers from poor audio synchronization, but the impressive visual effects and ambitious mythological storytelling elevate this entry above more formulaic genre offerings. From mythological monsters to moon men, Italian peplum films created a universe where muscles conquered all obstacles. No matter how improbable, these public domain treasures, despite their technical flaws, capture a uniquely inventive era of filmmaking that influenced everything from superhero movies to fantasy epics. If you've enjoyed this muscular journey through cinema history, flex that subscription button and share this video with fellow film adventurers. Until next time, remember, in peplum, the solution to any problem is simply more muscles. What makes a man like Quentin Tarantino, Hollywood's blood-soaked enfant, terrible? Bull at the altar of the Western. The genre that shaped his most acclaimed works remains his obsession. Today, we're diving into the 13 films that the master himself calls the greatest Westerns ever committed to celluloid. These aren't just movies, they're Tarantino's film school. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. The best directed film of all time. That's not film school hyperbole. That's Tarantino's own declaration about Sergio Leone's masterpiece. Released in 1966, this spaghetti western redefined what the genre could be, taking the American western and injecting it with European artistry and moral ambiguity. Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name reaches his iconic peak here as Blondie, hunting for Confederate gold alongside Eli Wallach's Tuco and Lee Van Cleef's Angel Eyes. Leone transforms the American Civil War into an apocalyptic backdrop where alliances shift like desert sand. The director's obsessive attention to detail creates a world where extreme close-ups of squinting eyes become as dramatic as any gunfight. What makes this film Tarantino's favorite isn't just the stylized violence. It's Leone's revolutionary approach to time. Scenes unfold with agonizing patience, tension building like a stretched rubber band. The final cemetery standoff extends for nearly 5 minutes, with barely a word spoken, a sequence Tarantino has referenced as pure cinema. The film's influence on Tarantino is unmistakable. His penchant for Mexican standoffs, morally gray characters, and operatic violence all trace back to Leone's masterpiece. When asked about the film's impact, Tarantino remarked, "When I saw this as a kid, I realized movies could be more than just entertainment. They could be art that punches you in the face." Even the film's iconic score by Ennio Morricone has directly influenced Tarantino's work. The whistling theme became so culturally embedded that Tarantino couldn't resist borrowing Morricone's compositions for his own films, including The Hateful Eight, which finally won the composer his first competitive Oscar at age 87. Rio Bravo, 1959. If I'm depressed, I'll put on Rio Bravo and it makes me happy. Tarantino's love affair with Howard Hawks' Western isn't about gunslinging action, it's about hanging out with characters who feel like old friends. This 1959 classic represents the Western at its most confident and relaxed, a film more concerned with character dynamics than frontier justice. John Wayne stars as Sheriff John T. Chance, holding a dangerous prisoner while fending off the criminal's powerful brother. What elevates the film is the makeshift family that forms around Chance, Dean Martin's alcoholic deputy Dude, Walter Brennan's limping old-timer Stumpy, and Ricky Nelson's young gunslinger Colorado. Together, they create what Tarantino calls the perfect hangout movie. Hawks films these interactions with deceptive simplicity, allowing conversations to unfold naturally rather than rushing to the next action sequence. This approach directly influenced Tarantino's own dialogue-heavy style. Hawks taught me that characters talking can be more exciting than characters shooting. Tarantino once explained in an interview, "What particularly fascinates Tarantino is how the film balances masculine toughness with emotional vulnerability. Dean Martin's struggle with alcoholism plays out with remarkable sensitivity for a 1950s Western. When Dude's hands shake too badly to roll a cigarette, it's a moment of quiet devastation that rivals any gunfight." The film's influence extends beyond Tarantino. John Carpenter remade it as Assault on Precinct 13, and the basic premise, a lawman and unlikely allies holding out against overwhelming odds, has become a Hollywood staple. For Tarantino, however, it remains the ultimate comfort film, a world he revisits whenever real life feels too harsh. The Searchers, 1956. The Searchers isn't just the greatest Western ever made. It might be the greatest American film, period. Tarantino's assessment of John Ford's 1956 masterpiece echoes what many film scholars have argued for decades. Yet, what makes this film so crucial to Tarantino's canon is how it confronts the dark heart of the American West, and by extension, America itself. John Wayne delivers his most complex performance as Ethan Edwards, a Confederate veteran who embarks on a years-long quest to rescue his niece from Comanche captivity. The disturbing truth, gradually revealed, is that Ethan intends to eliminate her for becoming one of them. This exploration of racism and obsession transforms the traditional Western hero into something far more disturbing. Ford frames this psychological journey against Monument Valley's breathtaking vistas, creating a visual language that contrasts human smallness against the landscape's vastness. The film's famous doorway bookends, where Ethan stands isolated from civilization, have been referenced countless times, including in Tarantino's own The Hateful Eight. What Tarantino particularly admires is the film's willingness to embrace moral complexity. Ford was making a film about racism starring John Wayne, America's hero, as essentially a psychopath, Tarantino noted. That took guts in 1956. This unflinching examination of American mythology's darker aspects has clearly influenced Tarantino's own revisionist takes on genre cinema. The film's technical achievements remain stunning. Ford's use of VistaVision to capture the landscape created images of remarkable clarity and depth, while Max Steiner's score alternates between stirring adventure themes and unsettling motifs that underscore Ethan's questionable motives. Though initially received as simply another Western, The Searchers has grown in stature to become the urtext for filmmakers examining America's complicated relationship with its frontier past. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Leone's ultimate Western, a film so perfect it feels like it was carved rather than shot. Tarantino's reverence for Sergio Leone's 1968 epic goes beyond mere admiration. It's closer to religious devotion. This deliberate, grandiose meditation on the Western myth represents Leone at the height of his powers, creating what many consider the spaghetti Western's crowning achievement. The film's opening sequence alone, nearly 15 minutes with barely a word spoken, demonstrates Leone's mastery. 3 gunmen wait at a train station with only ambient sounds: a creaking windmill, knuckles cracking, water dripping onto a hat. This sequence taught Tarantino the power of patient tension building, a lesson he's applied throughout his filmography. Henry Fonda's casting against type as blue-eyed villain, Frank represents one of cinema's great reversals. America's moral compass transformed into a cold-blooded child killer, shocked audiences, and demonstrated how the spaghetti Western could subvert Hollywood conventions. Tarantino would later employ similar casting against type with actors like John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. What particularly fascinates Tarantino is Leone's exploration of myth-making itself. Charles Bronson's harmonica-playing Avenger and Jason Robard's reluctant outlaw represent Western archetypes reaching their evolutionary endpoint. Claudia Cardinale's Jill embodies the civilization that will eventually render these archetypes obsolete. Ennio Morricone's score deserves special mention. Composed before filming began, Leone actually played the music on set to help actors understand the emotional rhythm of scenes. This integration of music and image creates a nearly operatic experience, with character themes functioning like leitmotifs in a Wagner composition. The film's deliberate pacing initially proved challenging for American audiences, but its reputation has only grown with time. For Tarantino, it represents cinema at its most confidently artistic. Leone understood that Westerns weren't about historical accuracy. They were about mythology, almost like samurai films set in Monument Valley. The Wild Bunch, 1969. The Wild Bunch changed everything. After that film, there was no going back to white hats and black hats. Tarantino's assessment of Sam Peckinpah's revolutionary 1969 Western cuts to the heart of why this film matters. Released in a year of profound social upheaval, it represented nothing less than the Western genre's violent reckoning with modernity. Set in 1913 along the Texas-Mexico border, the film follows aging outlaws led by William Holden's Pike Bishop as they plan one final score before retirement. What distinguishes Peckinpah's approach is his refusal to romanticize these men. They're brutal, compromised figures caught between two worlds, their code of loyalty the only thing separating them from complete moral bankruptcy. The film's violence, balletic, horrific, and presented in groundbreaking slow motion, shattered Hollywood conventions. Bodies don't just fall, they dance macabre ballets as bullets tear through flesh and blood erupts in crimson clouds. Tarantino has frequently cited these sequences as transformative to his understanding of action cinema. What particularly resonates with Tarantino is Peckinpah's exploration of men whose time has passed. The film opens with children gleefully watching scorpions being devoured by ants, a metaphor for both the audience's relationship to screen violence and the bunch's position in a world where horseback outlaws face automobiles and machine guns. The film's famous final walk, the bunch striding towards certain death, represents cinema's perfect distillation of fatalistic courage. As Holden tells his men, "Let's go," a simple line transformed into an existential statement about facing annihilation on one's own terms. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. This iconic line from John Ford's elegiac 1962 Western could serve as Tarantino's own artistic manifesto. Shot in stark black and white when color westerns were standard, the film represents Ford's most sophisticated examination of how the West was won, not just with guns, but with myths and narratives that often obscured uncomfortable truths. Jimmy Stewart plays Ransom Stoddard, an Eastern lawyer who gains fame for supposedly killing notorious outlaw Liberty Valance. John Wayne's Tom Doniphan represents the Western hero rendered obsolete by the civilization Stoddard brings. The film's central revelation that Wayne actually shot Valance from the shadows becomes a powerful metaphor for how history simplifies complex realities. What captivates Tarantino about this film is its metafictional quality. Ford was essentially making a movie about how his own westerns had created mythologies that weren't entirely true, Tarantino explained. It's a film about filmmaking itself. This self-awareness about genre conventions would later become a hallmark of Tarantino's work. The film's visual restraint, shooting on sound stages rather than Monument Valley, creates an intentional artificiality that underscores its themes. The West of memory and myth rather than historical reality. Edith Head's costumes further emphasize this contrast, with Wayne's rugged buckskin set against Stewart's Eastern propriety. What particularly distinguishes Liberty Valance is its melancholic tone. Ford, nearing the end of his career, seems to be grappling with his own role in creating the Western mythology. When the final flashback ends and we return to the present, the sense of loss is palpable, both for the characters and for the Western itself, as a viable American art form. For Tarantino, the film represents the Western's most profound meditation on itself. It's Ford admitting that sometimes the stories we tell, it matter more than what actually happened, which is basically what I do in all my historical films. The Great Silence, 1968. The most brutally nihilistic Western ever made. Tarantino doesn't mince words when describing Sergio Corbucci's 1968 masterpiece, a film whose bleak worldview and shocking conclusion continue to disturb audiences decades later. Set in the snow-covered mountains of Utah, a radical departure from the sun-baked landscapes typical of the genre, The Great Silence represents the spaghetti western at its most politically charged and morally complex. Jean-Louis Trintignant plays the titular Silence, a mute gunfighter hunting bounty hunters who killed his family. His nemesis, the sadistic Loco, is portrayed with chilling glee by Klaus Kinski in one of his most memorable performances. What distinguishes the film is Corbucci's refusal to provide the cathartic violence that Western audiences expect, instead delivering an ending so shocking that American distributors initially refused to release the film. What fascinates Tarantino is how Corbucci inverts Western conventions. The hero's muteness serves as a powerful metaphor for the voiceless oppressed. The snow-covered setting transforms familiar Western iconography into something alien and hostile. Even Ennio Morricone's score avoids traditional Western motifs in favor of a haunting, melancholic theme. The film's politics remain startlingly relevant. Bounty hunters target the poor and marginalized with legal impunity, protected by corrupt institutions. When a black sheriff attempts to uphold justice, he's brutally dispatched. This systemic critique clearly influenced Tarantino's own Django Unchained, which pays direct homage to Corbucci's unflinching vision. Most remarkable is the film's legendary ending, which Tarantino calls the most courageous conclusion in Western history. Without spoiling it entirely, Silence's confrontation with Loco ends not with heroic triumph, but with something far more disturbing, a denial of justice that forces viewers to confront the often ugly historical realities behind Western mythology. Corbucci understood that sometimes the bad guys won, Tarantino noted. That's what makes this film feel more honest than 100 Hollywood westerns with their neat moral conclusions. The Professionals, 1966. A perfect machine of a movie, every part working in precise harmony. This is how Tarantino describes Richard Brooks's 1966 adventure western, a film that combines classical Hollywood craftsmanship with the moral complexity emerging in the genre during that pivotal decade. What particularly appeals to Tarantino is the film's balance of traditional Western thrills with sophisticated character dynamics and unexpected narrative turns. The premise is deceptively simple. Millionaire J.W. Grant hires 4 specialists to rescue his wife from Mexican revolutionary Jesus Raza. The team consists of explosives expert Bill Dallworth, weapons specialist Henry Rico, horse wrangler Hans Ehrengard, and tracker Jake Sharp. What makes the film special is how it continually subverts expectations about its characters and their mission. What Tarantino particularly admires is Brooks's economic storytelling. Each character is established with remarkable efficiency. Marvin testing a rifle's accuracy, Lancaster blowing up an oil well, Ryan calming a wild horse. These wordless sequences tell us everything we need to know about these men's capabilities and temperaments. The film's visual language deserves special mention. Cinematographer Conrad Hall captures the harsh southwestern landscapes with a beauty that nonetheless conveys their danger. Shooting in Death Valley and Valley of Fire State Park, Hall creates images of painterly composition that influenced Tarantino's own approach to Western landscapes in Django Unchained. The film's most subversive element comes in its third act. When the professionals discover that Maria wasn't kidnapped at all, she fled willingly to return to her former lover Raza. This moral complication transforms a straightforward rescue mission into something far more nuanced, forcing the characters to reconsider their loyalties and motivations. Lancaster's final line to Bellamy's corrupt businessman, "Rico, you want to come back for the reward?" represents the perfect distillation of the film's sardonic view of honor in a world where money typically trumps morality. It's precisely this blend of entertainment and ethical complexity that Tarantino seeks in his own filmmaking. The Tall T, 1957. Bud Boetticher and Randolph Scott created westerns so pure they're practically haiku. Tarantino's appreciation for this 1957 gem speaks to his fascination with genre filmmakers who achieved greatness within tight constraints. Running a lean 78 minutes and shot in just 20 days, The tall T demonstrates how limitations can produce remarkable artistic focus. Based on an Elmore Leonard story, the film follows rancher Pat Brennan, who gets caught up in a stagecoach hijacking, led by calculating outlaw Frank Usher. What distinguishes the film is its emphasis on character over action. Long stretches consist simply of people talking, their dialogues revealing complex moral shadings that transcend simplistic hero-villain dynamics. What particularly captivates Tarantino is Boetticher's visual economy. Every composition serves the story, with the Rocky Alabama Hills locations becoming a character in themselves. This efficiency extends to the storytelling. The film's shocking opening act concludes with the slaying of a stagecoach driver and his young passenger, their deaths occurring off-screen, but conveyed with chilling effectiveness through sound and reaction shots. Richard Boone's Frank Usher ranks among Western cinema's most complex villains, intelligent, articulate, and oddly honorable within his own moral framework. He forms a grudging respect for Scott's Brennan that complicates their inevitable confrontation. This relationship clearly influenced the dynamic between Christoph Waltz and Jamie Foxx in Tarantino's Django Unchained. Randolph Scott's performance represents the culmination of his screen persona, the weathered, laconic cowboy whose still waters run deep. At 59 during filming, Scott brings a lived-in quality to Brennan that younger actors couldn't have achieved. His minimalist acting style creates a fascinating contrast with Boone's more expressive approach. The film belongs to what critics call the renown cycle, 7 westerns Boetticher, made with Scott and producer Harry Joe Brown. Tarantino considers these films collectively as the most underappreciated body of work in American cinema, perfect little diamonds that influenced everyone from Peckinpah to Eastwood to me. Johnny Guitar, 1954. The Western as Fever Dream, a technicolor eruption of repressed desires and gender subversion. Tarantino's description of Nicholas Ray's 1954 cult classic captures what makes this film so startlingly unique. Ostensibly a Western, Johnny Guitar plays more like melodrama filtered through surrealism, creating what Tarantino calls a Western for people who think they don't like Westerns. Joan Crawford stars as Vienna, a saloon owner whose establishment sits on land coveted by cattle baron Emma Small. The titular Johnny Guitar is Vienna's former lover, hired ostensibly for his musical abilities, but really to provide protection against Emma's escalating threats. What makes the film revolutionary is how it reconfigures Western gender dynamics. The primary conflict isn't between men, but between 2 powerful women. What fascinates Tarantino is Ray's expressionistic approach. The film's heightened colors, stylized dialogue, and operatic emotions create a Western universe unlike any other. Vienna's saloon, built into a rock face with an incongruous chandelier and piano, epitomizes the film's blend of Western iconography and flamboyant artifice. The film's sexual politics remain remarkably progressive. Vienna wears pants and runs her business with unflinching authority, while Emma's hatred barely disguises obsessive attraction. As Tarantino noted, Ray understood that Westerns had always been about repression. He just decided to bring all that subtext right to the surface. The film's initial reception proved troubled. Many critics dismissed it as lurid and excessive. François Truffaut and other European critics recognized its brilliance first, appreciating how Ray was using genre conventions to explore psychological territory typically absent from Westerns. This critical rehabilitation parallels Tarantino's own career-long championing of misunderstood genre films. Perhaps most remarkable is the film's fiery climax, where Vienna and Emma's confrontation reaches its inevitable conclusion. Crawford and McCambridge's real-life hatred for each other infuses their performances with authentic venom, creating what Tarantino describes as the Western's most thrilling gunfight. And it's between 2 women, which was revolutionary then and would still be revolutionary now. Red River, 1948. The Western that proved John Wayne could really act. Tarantino's appreciation for Howard Hawks' 1948 epic speaks to his understanding of how the film transformed Wayne from Western star to genuine dramatic actor. Often compared to Mutiny on the Bounty, transplanted to the cattle trails, the film explores themes of generational conflict, leadership, and American expansion with remarkable sophistication. Wayne plays Thomas Dunson, a ruthlessly determined rancher driving his cattle from Texas to Missouri along the Chisholm Trail. As the journey progresses, Dunson's tyrannical leadership alienates the men, particularly his surrogate son, Matthew Garth. Their inevitable confrontation forms the emotional core of what Tarantino calls the most Shakespearean of all Westerns. What particularly impresses Tarantino is Hawke's mastery of scale. The film alternates between intimate character moments and spectacular sequences involving thousands of cattle and dozens of riders. The river crossing scene, where the herd nearly stampedes, remains one of cinema's most technically impressive achievements, influencing similar sequences in everything from The Lion King to Tarantino's own Django Unchained. The casting of Clift opposite Wayne creates fascinating tension. Wayne's muscular, domineering presence contrasts with Clift's more introspective, modernist acting style. This clash of performance approaches perfectly embodies the film's generational conflict, old frontier values versus a more progressive, compassionate vision of the West. Particularly notable is the film's complex portrayal of masculine relationships. The surrogate father-son dynamic between Wayne and Clift carries surprising emotional weight, while Walter Brennan's Groot provides both comic relief and moral conscience. When Dunson tells Garth, "You're good enough to work for me," it functions simultaneously as the highest praise and as evidence of his inability to fully express paternal love. The film's famous ending, where Hawke steps back from the tragic conclusion of the source novel, remains controversial. Tarantino defends it. Hawks understood that Westerns are ultimately about American mythology. The reconciliation might feel abrupt, but it serves the film's deeper exploration of how violent men eventually make way for civilization. Unforgiven, 1992. The ultimate deconstruction of the Western myth by the man who embodied that myth. Tarantino's assessment of Clint Eastwood's 1992 masterpiece acknowledges how the film functions as both eulogy and critique of the genre that made Eastwood a star. Released when many considered the Western dead, Unforgiven breathed new life into the form precisely by questioning its fundamental moral assumptions. Eastwood plays William Money, a reformed outlaw and widower who takes one final job to provide for his children. Accompanied by his old partner, Ned Logan, and the boastful Schofield Kid, Money pursues a bounty on two cowboys who disfigured a prostitute. What distinguishes the film is its unflinching examination of violence, not as spectacle but as moral catastrophe that damages perpetrator and victim alike. What particularly resonates with Tarantino is Eastwood's willingness to subvert his own screen persona. Eastwood spent decades building a certain type of Western hero, Tarantino noted, then used this film to show how that archetype was built on self-serving mythology. When Money finally reverts to his violent ways, it's presented not as triumph, but as spiritual desolation. Gene Hackman's Little Bill Daggett represents one of cinema's most complex antagonists, a brutal sheriff who nonetheless believes he's bringing civilization to a lawless town. His confrontations with Money create what Tarantino calls the Western's perfect moral stalemate, two men justified by their own codes, but damned by any objective moral standard. David Webb. People's screenplay deserves special mention for its poetic dialogue that manages to feel both period-appropriate and For Tarantino, this sequence represents the Western coming full circle, the genre finally confronting the moral cost of the mythology it spent a century creating. Day of the Outlaw, 1959. The most beautifully bleak Western ever made. Tarantino's championing of André de Toth's 1959 snowbound Western speaks to his appreciation for the genre's overlooked masterpieces. Shot in stark black and white against Oregon's winter landscapes, the film transforms familiar Western iconography into something alien and hostile, a frozen hell where moral compromises prove as inevitable as the killing cold. Robert Ryan plays Blaze Sterrett, a rancher planning to eliminate local farmer Hal Crane, who has fenced off the open range and married the woman Starrett loves. This standard Western conflict is upended when Jack Brune, a wounded cavalry captain turned outlaw, arrives with his gang of desperate men, holding the town hostage while seeking medical attention. What particularly captivates Tarantino is how the film uses its harsh winter setting to externalize its moral landscape. De Toth understood that environment shapes morality, Tarantino explained. The snow doesn't just create striking visuals, it forces characters into impossible choices. The final sequence, where Starrett leads the outlaws into a mountain blizzard, ranks among cinema's most harrowing depictions of nature's indifference to human suffering. Ryan's performance deserves special mention. His Starrett begins as a bitter, vengeful man, but discovers unexpected heroism when confronted with a greater evil. The actor's weathered face becomes a map of moral recalculation. His initial grievances rendered petty by Brune's men and their capacity for casual cruelty. Burl Ives, best known for folk singing and voice acting, delivers a performance of surprising menace as Brune. Maintaining control over his men through sheer force of will, while slowly dying from a bullet wound, Brune represents what Tarantino calls the Western's most human villain, a bad man trying to prevent his men from becoming something worse. The film's visual style, influenced by film noir as much as Western traditions, creates a claustrophobic atmosphere rare in the typically expansive genre. De Toth's camera captures faces in harsh shadow and landscapes in disorienting whiteouts, creating what Tarantino describes as the perfect visual equivalent of moral ambiguity, a world where clear sightlines are impossible, both literally and figuratively. From snow-swept mountains to sun-baked deserts, these 13 films capture what made Tarantino fall in love with the Western, its moral complexity disguised as simple entertainment. These weren't just movies that influenced him. They were his education in how cinema can transform myth into art. What Western films have shaped your perspective? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films that made our favorite filmmakers. Until next time, keep watching the classics that still have something to say.